funny cause the rappers are posing as the gangsters while the government taking money as bonuses for bankers. In life you learn to close your eyes and hold your tongue, but together we will overcome. There's never been a chosen one.
I promised this video a long time ago, pretty much talking about who Paul Hellyer was, what his plan was for Canada, what he tried to warn Canadians about. Now, this gentleman, he was the Defense Minister of Canada between 1964 and 67, and I got to meet him on one occasion. I shook his hand. I made sure I waited around after he gave his speech in Toronto to introduce myself, shake his hand, and express my gratitude for what he was saying and what he was trying to do. And I feel like I have to carry that on and kind of try to warn people about the same things he was warning people about. Now keep in mind, this guy was the Defense Minister of Canada, one of the highest ranking members of the government in the 60s. And he wasn't allowed to speak to any of the caucuses for any of the political parties. The NDP, the Liberals, the Conservatives, none of them would allow him to address their caucus. So he'd pretty much been blackballed. Now the reason he was blackballed is pretty simple. He was pretty much going around the country giving tours, speaking tours. He wrote several books about it, about how the banking system had pretty much usurped our government, that the banks that the government borrows from at all levels of government, municipal, provincial, federal governments, were all borrowing money from these banks, who are allowed to, since they changed the Bank Act, to allow fractional reserve lending, loan the government money that they don't have. So create money from nothing and give it to the government, and then charge the government compound interest on it, which the government then has to pay back, plus all that interest. So they're doing nothing, and in exchange for doing nothing and loaning the government money that they never had to work for or do anything for, the government has to extract the entire value of those loans plus the interest from the taxpayers, which in his view and in my view amounts to modern day slavery. Because you're forced to work for people who've done nothing in exchange for your labor. And this isn't a small amount of money. It's the largest expense on the federal budget and in the provincial budget in Ontario anyway. That's where I'm from. So they're enslaving us to these banks. And he didn't really mince words. He pretty much called it out. He called out the families that control these banks. He calls out the dates, the names, the times that all these things transpired. And I highly recommend any of his books. They're all very informative. His most recent book, I'll put that on screen. It's a really good read. It's kind of the antidote to the Great Reset. So in my video I put out last time, I was contrasting the Great Reset with Paul Hellyer's vision of the future, which is one where pretty much people reclaim their freedom from these banks that have started enslaving us in secret in a way that most of us don't even recognize or understand. So most people don't have the time to figure out how the banking system works. And those that do, pretty much we get slandered as being conspiracy theorists, just because we actually understand how banking works. And specifically how central banking works, how governments pretty much enslave their people to their banker friends, and they all run off with our money. And the result of that is something we all see right now, is inflation happens. It's all this money that gets created out of nothing. It's not real, it's a fugazi, it's meant to just fuck you. Now there's people who are trying to say they're going to fix this, like Pierre in Canada, the new Conservative Party leader. This guy's full of shit. He keeps talking about money printing. It's not money printing. They ain't printing this money. Sure, maybe they're printing a small amount of it, maybe, but really most of it's borrowing. It's not printing. And they're borrowing it from banks that create it from nothing, which is total bullshit. Absolute bullshit. And he's kind of disguising borrowing as printing. There's a big difference between printing money into existence and borrowing it or loaning it into existence. I used to volunteer with CUMR, the Committee on Monetary and Economic Reform. Now, we tried to sue the Government of Canada to reinstate the Bank of Canada to its original mandate so that they could get interest-free money from the Bank of Canada instead of borrowing it with compound interest applied from banks that create it from nothing. Now, it was pretty obvious to me. I tried to warn CUMR that this was not going to work. The courts were just going to throw it out. I mean, I was probably the youngest guy there. Nobody really took me seriously or listened to me. But I said, like, look, we need a public relations campaign. Like, the public needs to know that this lawsuit is happening. Otherwise, the courts will just dismiss it, throw it to the curb. Like, oh, well, no one's going to make a fuss about this. Like, we'll just completely throw it into the garbage can, even though it was a constitutionally valid lawsuit. Like, it was written into the Canadian Constitution that we shouldn't do this. The guy in Canada's $50 bill fought tooth and nail against the type of banking system that Canada adopted in the 70s. And this was all done by Justin Trudeau's father. Pierre Elliott Trudeau changed the Bank Act in '73 to allow fractional reserve lending. And lo and behold, his son is now Prime Minister. His drama teacher, snowboard instructor son, who isn't qualified at all to be Prime Minister of the country. But it's pretty obvious that, to me anyway, a deal was made for that to happen long before he was old enough to really lead the country. And I'm guessing just in hindsight that they didn't realize this guy had no aptitude whatsoever for that sort of role. That's why he makes a fucking doofus out of himself. And that's why nobody likes him, because he's a clown. He's a spoiled rich kid who was promised a job before he was old enough to walk, thanks to his daddy. But people are kind of cluing into this now, so they're kind of desperate to set up these central bank digital currencies so that they can pretty much swap everyone over to that and then have full control. You try to speak up, you'll be like one of those truckers in Canada. They'll just shut your bank account down. That's what we're moving towards. Instead of a race against time between people figuring that out and those things being implemented. Because once that's implemented, your only backup is privacy coins. So if you don't have private crypto or gold or silver, you won't be able to transact unless the government authorizes you to perform whatever transaction that is. So I really want to just say, look up who Paul Hellyer is. You can say I'm just some crypto guy who doesn't really matter. Nobody really knows who the fuck I am. What the fuck do I have to say? But this guy was the defense minister of our country. He named names. He told you the specific families. You can go and watch his videos where he was speaking. I mean, may he rest in peace. He's dead now. But this guy was a legend while he lived. He tried to tell Canadians exactly what was happening. And it's for that reason nobody knows who he even is. The voices that you need to listen to are the ones they silence the most. They don't even mention him. I mean, he died and our media hardly even, like, nobody in the mainstream media mentioned it when he died. Everyone else, they'd have like, oh, the news articles and glorifying how he was so great. No mention of him whatsoever. So those are the type of people you should be looking into. That's really what it is.